Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where you'll hear stories about people getting what they deserve, guys. I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and in this episode, you're about to hear some super satisfying revenge stories. So buckle up, because we're diving in, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for future stories, guys. So, this all happened years ago when I was still in college. I worked for a delivery joint. The company seemed super cool because they provided cars instead of forcing you to beat down your own car. That's a huge perk, right? Well, I thought so in the beginning, but I realized not so much. Now, the owner used to use this as justification to take a percentage of the driver's tips. Often, this would result in an employee making below minimum wage. If you made below minimum wage, the owner would make you come in and pick up your check in person and sign a document saying that you did make minimum wage, due to the undocumented cash tips, or some sort of nonsense like that. Now, this was a problem for two reasons. Number one, the state that I was in, the employees' tips belong to the employees, unless you're part of an employee tip pooling agreement. This was plain as day on the Department of Labor website. So the owner taking our tips was already crossing a line. Number two, you can't just wave your hand and force employees to say that they made above minimum wage, so pretty shady, right? Now, most people would see the situation and run for the hills, which a lot of people did, and it was really hard to keep employees at the shop. I, on the other hand, saw the potential. See, I'm pretty well versed in labor law and decided that I was gonna ride this out. I wanted to see how long the owner would keep this up. Here and there, I would make comments to the managers about the legality of their practices and was often told, "Oh, our lawyers said it's okay, so it's okay." And I would love to meet these lawyers one day. So I patiently waited for over a year, documenting every single cent they took from me and encouraging the other drivers to do so too. Every new driver that came through the door got a little powwow with me, and I would give them the skinny. Unfortunately, my plan must have leaked because sooner than later the joint decided to fire me after making up 3 bogus infractions. Now, if you're interested in those, ask and I'll explain in an edit. Now, this wasn't a problem though, as my plan was already in action. See, in this state, unpaid wages collect interest. So what was $20 to $40 a night, 5 nights a week, over 1 year quickly became a pretty decent sum. So I began collecting the names of current and previous employees whom have been screwed over by the company, and collected their documented data, and sent it off to the Department of Labor. At the end of the day, it took a couple of months, but the company was eventually required to pay a decent chunk of change to all parties and a pretty hefty fine on top. Overall, I believe they were forced to pay about $100,000, but I wasn't done though. You see, those shady little documents that they had us sign claiming we made over minimum wage affected how the company was reporting its payroll tax. The IRS eventually came in and hit them for a ton of back taxes. Finally, I was increasingly aware of the company's under-the-table agreement with their health inspector, which I decided to go ahead and tip off the health department. This resulted in even more fines and a temporary closure for the joint. So altogether, it ended up costing this dumb little delivery joint a ton of money just to stay open, all because they wanted 20% of their drivers' tips. So the moral here is this: know your labor laws. It's people like these whom profit off the ignorance or fear of a workforce. The more you know about your rights, the less idiots like these would be able to survive in the wild. Now, I also wanted to address something I saw in the comments quite a bit. If you're in a situation that does not seem right, document everything. Keep a little black notebook, write down everything. The most important thing that you can do to protect yourself from the nonsense in the workplace is document, document, document. And if you're ever in question of something, be it disability rights or earnings, you can always contact your state EEOC branch or DOL branch. They will gladly help you figure out what is and what isn't proper. Don't be a person who gets taken advantage of by bad employers. If you don't fight back, they will never learn their lesson. My friends, OP is definitely the hero in this one, playing the long game to give a shady employer what they deserve. And hey, this post was also educational. And for all of you who are curious about the bogus infractions that OP was fired for, here they are. OP says, so the way this joint worked was you, as a delivery driver, got an insulated box that was supposed to contain the order. You weren't supposed to check the box or confirm the order was accurate. That was another guy's job. So my first infraction, the said order checker swapped the addresses on 2 orders I was taking. The second I called in that the second one was delivered, they told me I delivered the boxes to the wrong places. That was strike 1. The second time, they dicked me over and literally just put empty boxes in my delivery boxes with a phone book, and then accused me of taking the food. For my final one, they claimed that someone called in and said I had flipped off another driver. Now, I would have to have the world's worst concussion to actually think I could get away with that. No matter what I said though, they took the call-in's word as law. They used that to fire me as my third infraction. I had some choice words for the manager, and he looked ready to pop. It was amazing. Guys, that definitely sounds like a nightmare employer. It just makes the revenge so much sweeter hearing about these bogus infractions that led to OP's termination. Now, about a year before the whole pandemic thing, I lost my government job. I'm an audiologist, and so I had little doubt that I would find work. But I also knew my best bet for top earnings was to work for myself. So I secured my financing, sold a bunch of stocks and mutual funds, and set about finding a property. Now, my plan was to open a practice by buying a building that had rentable space to help bring in an additional revenue stream. I eventually came upon this great little building in the heart of downtown with a nice big parking lot. The building was a former commercial garage. The giant bay doors where the trucks used to come in and out of were replaced by these nice walls full of windows that still open like garage doors, but formed a covered space in front of the units. This is relevant for later. Now, I knew the property just from being around town, and I thought it looked really cool. They are crisp and modern, and in my opinion, have a cool Scandinavian feel to them. Anyway, I love this building. So as I roll up to take my first tour with the realtor and the owner, I pull into the parking lot as instructed. And the moment I step out of the car, I see a woman rushing out of the building towards me. I'm wondering, is this the owner? Someone who works for the owner? But no, it's a woman with a face full of piercings, loudly telling me that I need to move my car now, or it's gonna be towed. I tell her I have a meeting here, and she would have none of it. She says, "Move it now, or I call the police." Now, I was about to move my car when the realtor and the owner show up and began walking towards me. She immediately retreats before they got close enough for us to work all of it out. I clarified that I was okay to park there, and they confirmed it was just fine. I asked who that was, and they told me that she owns one of the shops in the unit, and to just ignore her, and that she thinks she runs the place. So I walk the property and go over some things, and life is good. I get into my car and leave pretty convinced that this is the place I want to buy. But because I also intended to house my practice there, I agreed to lease one of the units and start getting set up, all while the closing stuff that needed to happen could be completed. So for about 2 months, I was a tenant like all the other tenants. I never really got into the fact that I was buying the building yet because my interactions with my neighbors were polite but transactional. Well, mostly polite. The woman with all the yelling, let's call her Megan, was none too pleased with my presence. She owned a store that sold custom-made costumes, lots of steampunk outfits and costumes that she makes herself. It was impressive work, though honestly, I have to imagine she does most of her trade online since I seldom see people in her place. I was not there more than a week when she barges into my unit and began making sure that I was aware that the parking lot was not for customers and was for them only, and that I was allotted one spot. I told her, thanks, but I have parking all worked out with Gus, the owner. I told her I appreciate her concern and I showed her the door. Now, the parking lot, which I was purchasing along with the building, has 60 spaces. There are 5 units. According to her, we are each allowed 1 parking space and no customers or visitors are permitted to park there at all. So I know there's other shenanigans afoot or this woman is just lying. Anyways, I ignore her. As time passes by, I close on the building. The owner sends out a heartwarming thank you email to all the tenants, saying he appreciates their years of business together, but the property is now owned by me. Pretty clear stuff. Now, the very first thing I did was reorganize the parking lot. Each unit gets 1 regular parking space, primo spots right next to the building. There's 2 15-minute loading spots back there as well. I then designated the next 5 closest space to handicap parking. The rest was just for parking for customers, etc. My long-term plan was to put in an automated parking kiosk, so people who are there to enter the businesses to use their services can park for free, but anyone else will have to pay. But that's down the road. For now, I just need to formalize some stuff and just accept that I may have some people parking there illegally, and if that becomes a problem, I'll have to hit the security camera to see who's abusing the system. Anyway, Megan is furious. She's furious that there's not enough handicap spots, and there were none before, and she's also pissed that she needs more than 15 minutes for a loading zone. Who's timing it? She's pissed most of all, however, because she was never consulted. So fast forward a few days, and I parked in a non-parking spot. The sidewalk in front of my building is privately owned. Basically, you turn off the public sidewalk and walk down the private sidewalk to where all the businesses are. I parked on a paved patch right next to my unit, accessible only by my parking lot. I parked there with every legal right to do so, by the way, because I was unloading equipment. So since I owned the space I was parked on and everything around it, I didn't move my car right after. I walked outside a while later and my car is gone. So I immediately assumed that someone stole my car. And then there's Megan, standing in her doorway with a big grin on her face. I ask her if she knows anything about my missing car. She goes, "Oh, was that your car? I saw a car parked illegally, so I had it towed." So I went to the tow company that the prior owner had hired, and I laid into him for towing anything from my property without authorization. His argument was that he had a contract with the property. He did not. He had a contract with a company that formerly owned the building, that was now null. In the end, I knew that arguing would get me nowhere, so I paid him and took my car. I left with hate in my heart and my mind solely focused on revenge. I began really scrutinizing my security tapes and discovered that all of these unaccounted for vehicles in the parking lot all had something in common. Megan. I had a suspicion that she was selling parking in my parking lot. So I waited by one of the cars until a guy arrived. I told him as he walked from an area that was not my building that he was not authorized to park there. Now, the guy looks confused, and he told me to mind my own business and that he pays for parking. I introduced myself as the owner of the parking lot and asked who he was paying and how much. The answer was Megan, and he was paying $125 a month. Suddenly, her business made a lot more sense. I thought about confronting her. I thought about straight up evicting her. Instead, I hired a security company. They set up a temporary booth at the entrance of the parking lot, and a guard ensured that everybody there was there for one of the businesses. If someone parked and wandered off somewhere else, they were told that they were going to be towed. Anyone who claimed to be paying for parking would just be turned away. What followed was around 24 very angry people in Megan's store over the course of a week. They paid good money for these spots, and now she was pulling out the carpets. People were pissed. So then COVID hits and all the restrictions happen. I told the tenants that they can open the big garage door and have a covered outdoor space for their trade. Now, this was a necessary thing to keep them open, and everyone is super happy about this, except for Megan. Megan's unit is flanked by a coffee shop on one side and a little specialty bakery on the other. So now you have to walk around outdoor seating to get to her store. Megan is fuming. She starts calling the police multiple times a day, every day, for supposed COVID violations on my part, and on the part of the other tenants. The cops stopped coming after her third or fourth call. At this point, I had enough. Her lease was up in May, so I chose to not renew it. She threatened up and down that she was gonna sue me, and when she was done, the whole building would be hers. I responded by suing her for $125 a month that she collected from all those people for parking. The best of all, she didn't show up to court, so it resulted in a summary judgment in my favor. Now, I don't expect that I'll collect, though she did abandon at least a few $1,000 worth of inventory and equipment when she left, so that'll help. So, a couple of years ago, my mom went to visit one of her friends on the other side of town. My mom had parallel parked directly in front of her friend's house, which is at the bottom of a small hill. As she was leaving, a woman driving a Jeep Wrangler with her kids was driving down the small hill, but she was still a decent distance back, so my mom pulled out of her spot. Now, the road they were on was really wide, with enough space to fit 5 cars next to one another, and about 40 feet ahead was a stop sign. Now, my mom at this point was already in the middle of the road, fully out of the parking spot, and had gotten 10 feet, when the woman driving the Jeep suddenly comes up from behind my mom's car and cuts directly in front of her, crossing a double yellow line to do so. Because of the angle she cut my mom off at, the Jeep's rear wheel ended up ripping off my mom's front bumper. My mom naturally stopped, and the woman gets out of her car after straightening out on the road. As soon as she steps out of the car, the woman, who we'll call Karen, immediately starts cussing my mom out at the top of her lungs. Karen told my mom to call the police, but my mom told her that her phone had died. So my mom's friend and her son, as well as the neighbor, comes out of the house after hearing the commotion to see what happened. The neighbor asked what happened, and Karen yelled, "Go call the police. I need to call my boyfriend." The son had taken a few law classes in college, so he offered to take a bunch of pictures of the scene of the accident and send them to my mom later, and this becomes super important. The neighbor calls police, but Karen's boyfriend arrives there first. When the cop, let's call him Kenny, arrives, he asks my mom what happened, and just as my mom started to explain her side of the story, the cop says, "Wait just a minute," and walks over to the boyfriend. So as it turns out, the boyfriend, who we'll call Sam, was a cop in town who was pretty popular with kids in the middle schools, as he would occasionally visit to talk about things like DARE and other things in assemblies. Sam was off duty at the time, so he was able to come over when Karen called him. As soon as Kenny saw his bud Sam, he immediately goes to talk with him rather than my mom. They discussed for a little while and afterwards sent everybody on their way. My mom tried to talk to Kenny before he left, but Kenny just brushed it off and said he got the details he needed and that my mom would be able to get the police report in about a week or two. When my mom receives the police report, she saw that it said that she pulled out without using her blinkers and suddenly hit Karen's car. On top of that, Karen was expecting my mom's insurance to pay for the damages that's done to her rear wheel. So my mom goes to my neighbor Anthony to ask what she should do about the report since it was clearly wrong. Anthony was furious and told her that she should go to the police station and ask to see the chief, and if they ask why she needs to see him, that she should tell him that it's because she wants to file an internal complaint. So that day, my mom takes the photograph sent to her by the son and goes to the police station and asks the person working the front desk to see the chief and file an internal complaint. The deputy chief steps into the room and starts recording the conversation. Since the chief was out, my mom presented all the evidence to him instead. After presenting the evidence to show that it was in fact Karen that hit her instead of the other way around, my mom also says that she would like to file a corruption complaint against both Kenny and Sam. Kenny clearly did not do his job properly since he did not properly ask the actual people involved in the accident, and did not even note the fact that there were 2 passengers in Karen's car in the report. My mom said that Kenny would not listen to her and brushed her off as he was excited to see his buddy Sam. Sam meanwhile had interfered with the investigation despite not being at the scene of the crime during the time of the accident. The chief says that he'll start an internal investigation and will see if anything needs to be done. Meanwhile, my mom also filed a claim to her insurance and presented the evidence to them too. And her insurance decides that since the accident in their eyes was clearly not her fault, they weren't going to pay Karen a penny, and they would contact Karen's insurance to pay my mom instead. The investigation happens, including interviews with Karen, my mom's friend, and the friend's neighbor. About a month passed, and my mom gets a call saying that the situation has been dealt with and that Kenny has been punished, and he just wanted to know if there were any concerns she had. So here comes the fun part. 3 days later, a letter comes in the mail for a court hearing. It turns out that Karen decided to file 3 tickets against my mom just 1 day before the statute of limitations. So apparently in New Jersey, citizens are allowed to file complaints about other citizens breaking the law, and because of how late she filed these complaints, by the time we received them in the mail, we could not even counter-complain, and the only options were to pay the fine or to go to court. Now, we assumed that Karen had learned about being able to file a complaint from Sam, and that the only reason she was willing to go this far is because she assumed that my mom wouldn't know what to do about the tickets and would just pay up. What she didn't count on was the fact that my mom is actually really aggressive, with an absolutely massive network of people that she knows. So within a day, my mom hires a lawyer to fight the case, and they immediately asked to change the court from a small court in our town to one of the large courts a couple of towns away. The logic was that if she fought the case in our town, my mom would be at a disadvantage, since her case was essentially going against our town's beloved police force. But by putting them in a different town, the playing field would be even. The lawyer had prepared a huge amount of evidence against Karen, so there was no way that she was actually going to win the case no matter what. Come the court date, Karen doesn't even show up, so the case was thrown out. That was a very nice win, but what came after was even better. Since my mother and sister have a lot of friends in town, the story of Karen and Sam doing this shady bullcrap got out really fast. Soon half the town had heard about it. And suddenly, Karen and Sam went from 2 favorites in the town because of Sam's reputation to 2 of the most underhanded and nasty people. Sam stopped getting invited to school assemblies, and Karen was ostracized in her kids' school PTA. Anthony also ended up talking to the police chief in private, and we found out that although Sam was not officially punished, he was severely reprimanded by the chief. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today, and thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. If you missed the last episode of our /ProRevenge, I will link it right here. A boss blackmails OP to date him, and it does not end well. Yikes. Check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.